Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. Now there's been so much attention for such a long time on the entire question of corruption and inducements in one form or the other to government and to bureaucrats and the other thing. One of the things that we do need to take a close look at, because it is not clearly defined or regulated and there are no clear-cut laws in it, is at what point does the wrong end and the right begin when it comes to things like lobbying. Now, lobbying by itself is perfectly permissible, I guess, in India, but what is allowed, what is not allowed, what are the guidelines that should actually be governing lobbying? That is one of the things that we're going to take a look at here, because it is a big subject of considerable debate in every country of the world, including in countries like the United States, where it's not just a cottage industry, it's a massive industry. It's one of the biggest industries out there. India could be heading in that direction at some point, so it's important to get some basic ground rules or guidelines, if you like, into place. And we've got a fantastic panel who are, if you like, going to draft the ground rules for what we should and we should not do in the world of lobbying over the next 1 hour, right here on The Big Fight. Let's not wait for Parliament. To start with, Dilip Cherian, Dilip, image guru, PR expert, all sorts of things. I won't introduce you any further. Satyanath Sarangi is an activist. He'd worked very closely in Bhopal and has a very strong view on what lobbyists have done in Bhopal and other such areas. Sharif Ragnikar, president of the Nodal Association for the consultancy world, which really covers PR. He's also, of course, the CEO of Integral PR. Sharif, great that you could join us. We have Devinder Sharma, who's done a lot of work in food and trade policy, and again has a certain view on what lobbyists have often done. It's actually interesting. I'm suddenly looking at the dress code. Other than Dilip, most of the people who are opposed to the lobbyists and their activities are in kurta pajamas on this show. So Ryan Karanjawala, one of our top corporate lawyers. So Ryan, your suit gives it away. Exactly which side?
Only two.
Yeah, I'm also wearing a suit out here, and she's got a Nehru jacket. So there we are. And Amitabh Beher, director of the National Foundation of India. Thanks so much for joining us. Where do we stand in lobbying? Ryan, why don't you go
At
first?
the moment, lobbying is legal. The only thing is that it's not regulated. And lobbying essentially is understood by most people to be something like advocacy, except that it's not advocacy in court. For example, when you have CII, you have FICCI, when they go and meet and make representations before ministers, in a sense, they're lobbying. And so therefore, lobbying is completely legal. What does give it a bad name is if it crosses the line, someone is induced financially to do something, then actually the word for it is bribery. And it should not be confused with lobbying. Simple.
Okay, Amitabh?
I think the right question to ask is, should lobbying be banned? And I would say yes, particularly if you're talking of corporate lobbying. I think the important distinction that we need to make is between when private interests are being lobbied for and when public interests are being lobbied for. So when it's public interest, that's advocacy. We have been doing that for years. We have a huge history of people's struggles.
How would that actually work in practice? Because you're saying that, let's say there's a certain set of groups like yours which are arguing for a position against a corporate interest, right? You're saying that part of the lobbying is fine. The minute the person is lobbying from the private side, then that should be banned.
I did not say vis-a-vis the corporates. I said if the lobbying, the issue is of public interest, at least in a country like India, the public interest is reasonably clear, and if the lobbying is for private interest, I think there is a huge problem there. And then particularly if it's backed by inducements and if there's any form of corruption. So it's actually buying policies, then there's a problem.
As in so many of these debates, it's always going to come down to where you draw the specific line, so we'll try and arrive at that. But Sharif?
See, I think lobbying is heavily misunderstood. I mean, lobbying is historically a constitutional right because there's right to expression. You have the right to express your interest in something, and I think that's the genesis of it. It started way back in the 1300s in UK, and then what the US followed, they looked at it as a right to be heard. And I think in that situation, when it's a democracy, I think everyone should have those rights. But the problem that arrives, or the negative kind of impression that lobbying carries, comes only because it's invariably followed by a controversy. But what good lobbying does, or in terms of a right to express yourself, which is for everyone, that never gets heard, because it's like, you know, a plane flying, and you never talk about it when it flies normally. You only talk about it when it crashes. So, you know, so I think lobbying suffers from a bit of that. You know, it's invariably that it's the PR industry or the public affairs industry which gets kind of caught in these debates of contentious debates,
Right.
but never really the legal fraternity, which is actually the largest lobbyist across the world. The largest lobbyist in the US is a law firm, not a PR firm, not a PA firm.
Okay, Devinder.
For quite some time, I used to think that the economic policies of the country are drawn by economists or by the policymakers, and they know what is in the interest of India. But lately, over the last few years, I've realized that, the policies are not designed by our economists or the policymakers. They are actually designed or being worked out or, by the lobbyist. It's the corporate interest which actually designs all those policies. We all are told, we are made to believe that they are good for you, but actually they are only good for the corporates. And this is increasingly that what I am seeing, and I'm worried not only at this instance of the corporates taking over or designing the economic agenda of the country, but what is more important is now even the political heads are doing it. After 2009, if you have seen those 5 heads of the international heads who came to India, starting with Obama, President of the British Prime Minister, the French President, and so on, they all lobbied for FDI retail in India. No, it's gone up to that level.
So I'm trying to figure out at what point are you going to ban this? Are you going to say Obama should be banned from coming to India because he's lobbying?
I just want to say that we only think that lobbying is confined to lawyers or to the corporations or to the NGOs and so on. But now even the heads of the states are lobbying. And I think that is something we know. When Obama came to India and said that, India must open up for FDI and retail, of course, Obama knew what is good for his country. But the tragedy was that the Prime Minister of India also knew what is good for America. So that's the kind of lobbying that takes place. I think we must be very clear about it. Yeah.
Okay. Is Obama officially a lobbyist or not is something which I guess we have to address at some point. Dilip.
For a moment, consider a marketplace. And any resemblance to institutions that some of you recognize is entirely accidental. It consists of people in an unregulated space who are pushing thelas, throwing things at each other, arguing, bargaining, etc., etc. There's no regulation happening there. And then government brings about a law which says everybody who sells fruits or shirts over here must comply to strict ISO 2008 standards. And you say you can't employ child labor, you can make your shirts in any way, but it's got to comply to strict laws. But where is the product sold? In the marketplace, which is totally unregulated. My point is that if you have policy making made in the manner where it is totally opaque, as in India, where you don't know very often whose interest somebody who's speaking in the marketplace is talking about, or which interest is pushing his thela ahead, then you're talking of actually not regulating that marketplace. Whether it is the bureaucracy, whether it is the politician, the players in the policy framework.
So hang on. You seem to be saying that, look, it's better to bring it all out, have it all absolutely transparent that this is the person who's lobbying for that issue or that cause or so on and so forth, so that you can then regulate it. Because
no,
if you
I'm
don't
not saying
do
that. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that if you don't make policy making, the process of policy making, more transparent than it is today, if you don't know who pushed for what or why this particular agriculture policy came about, that is because the work happens in arcane committees where nobody knows what's taken, who's taken a call on it.
I'm come from Bhopal, where the worst corporate crime in world history was committed is continuing. So the way I look at it, apart from these spectacular crimes that we are talking about, whether CSK or India Cements or Thion Chemicals or Reliance or whatever, I'm saying there are routine.
Just for the record, I do have to say that none of those charges are proven right now. So
exactly, the allegations.
People who are not out
I'm saying aside from the spectacular allegations about spectacular crimes, there are routine corporate crimes occurring in this country every day against the people and against the environment and planet as a whole. And these crimes are being facilitated by legitimate and illegitimate means by lobbyists. And this is continuing. What legalizing them will do is make it legitimate. As it is, wherever it is legalized, take the case of US, where it is very clear, there were studies to show that for every dollar the corporations invest, they get something like $2,000 or more as rate on that investment. So they
actually take the US. There's a study done by the University of Kansas which I thought was absolutely staggering. A number 93 corporations spent 1,456 crore rupees on lobbying, but that eventually got them tax breaks to the tune of 3.2 lakh crore rupees.
Exactly.
Now, what is it actually that happens in a country like the United States? Sometimes when you're on the outside looking at what's happening in the US, it seems to me to be almost institutionalized corruption. There's a different sort of a corruption that happens out here, but if from a layperson's point of view looking at the US, you seem to be having a situation where you have lobbies who just go up to congressmen or senators and saying, here is the amount of money we are giving you for your re-election funds, and now we expect you to look after the following interest, which is not dissimilar to what we would do in India under the table with a bag of cash, and here it would be considered totally illegal.
I think in the US, the role of, how the democracy is structured is quite different, because if you just look at the role, the way we function as a democracy, there is the role of the media. When it comes to public policy, when it comes to debates on those kind of things, the US media itself doesn't even have a sense of a national media. So in terms of what information actually reaches out to the people, so that people can be involved in what is an informed decision in terms of influencing or putting pressure on the government, on a bureaucrat, on the corporate sector, or anyone for that matter, doesn't exist. Because a lot of your media is very local, it's very terrestrial. No, but that makes a huge difference.
But I'm just trying to ask, when if we are trying to say how is lobbying going to move it? Ryan, yeah.
The simple answer to what you just said is, so much was spent and so much was received. The question that you also have to ask is, were those corporations entitled to those tax breaks or not? The point is, very often you're lobbying for something which you feel is entitled, which actually should have come your way. For example, a whole pharmaceutical industry may go forward and say, look, we're on the edge of curing cancer. But in order to be able to do that, we need to get tax rebates on the amount of research and development we do. Otherwise, it's too competitive. We are just not able to go ahead and get the bang for our buck. Now, a policy maker may well say that, all right, the US government can take a little bit less tax as long as the larger good goes in, as long as you show and you establish that it goes for research and development, then go ahead and give them that tax break. If that interest is legitimate, as long as you're advocating it legitimately, there's nothing wrong with lobbying.
Amitabh, is there anything wrong with it?
No, I think there's something fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
And the US experience is going to be very different from the Indian experience. We are looking at an extremely unequal society, where you obviously need to look at the power relations. In a country like India, where you're talking of almost 40% of the global poor, that's what the World Bank is saying, living in this country, if you assume that they would be able to lobby on equal footing with corporates, then there's something fundamentally wrong. And the way the political economy works, the way the governance system works, we are all asking for pre-legislative deliberations. But that's different, where we want stakeholders, common people, to actually voice their aspirations. But it's very different from backroom lobbying, the way the corporates work, which I think is buying of policies.
Okay. I want to come to that backroom part of it in some more detail, but let me just get you in Devinder. The point that Ryan made, if there is a situation like that, where let's say the government needs to be educated, the example he took, that we are close to a cure for cancer, but we need a tax rebate to get this done. Is that right or wrong? And it's not, by the way, obviously there are certain lines which should not be crossed. If you have one lobbyist going in and saying, look, I'm going to pay you this much money under the table, obviously that's wrong. If it's FICCI which does it, if it's CII which does it, if it's, some other people who go in and saying, this is what we need to be able to deliver that, is there something intrinsically wrong to your mind in that?
And I think there's everything wrong there. Look at America at the moment. 400 people, the economic wealth of 400 people is equal to the economic wealth of the rest of the country. Now, this is the kind of inequality that prevails in America. If you were to see the poverty situation in America, 1 in 7 is living in poverty and 1 in 4 is living in hunger. I mean, if that's the kind of situation in America, and yet, the corporates say they need the tax breaks, I think the kind of unemployment that we have seen in America is quite an indication that, the money should have gone there. I think the fact of the matter is, because they have bribed their way, I would say, because of the kind of money that you give for elections, they stand to gain.
Okay.
And I think that is something which we should not repeat. The experience in America is clearly indicative that it's not workable.
Okay,
it's something
so
which is not done.
Can I just ask what actually happens in countries like America and others which have this is a very open thing? Now you could say this is more transparent, which is the point I was trying to make. You could say that the other option is that you will have people quietly going to ministers' rooms in the middle of the night, or and giving a suitcase or 2 suitcases of cash. What happens in America is it's all.
It's no longer suitcases, truckloads.
Trunkloads, whatever, bus. I have no idea what the going rate for ministers is right now, but I assume it's, okay, trucks into ministers' houses. The other way of looking at it is that in America, in a sense, it's all it's transparent. You're told, I am contributing this much money, I'm holding a fundraiser for you. This fundraiser will raise $2 million. Is that almost institutionalized bribery and corruption, or is it not?
You've touched the real nub of the problem. The problem begins, as I said earlier, and now you raise the issue of where policy making begins. If it is the politician, then what is the source of his funding, and what is it that makes him or her win and capable of winning? It's money. So now in America, what the lobbyists have found is that if these guys have got to win, they've got to be paid, you've got to be paid cash, and you've got to make them win so that they come into Senate and pass the rules you want. So if you want,
how is that
if
different
you want
from corruption in India? Is
no,
that also
it's
corruption?
not. It's completely different, because every person who stands for election has, like technically in India, the rule book exists, must be transparent in its funding. And so you know what interest funded his election. In India, do you know that?
Okay.
Is it likely you'll know that?
So right now, for example, we are heading for elections in 2014. I am happy to bet everything which I have in this world that there will be large sums of trucks or train loads of cash that will go to various politicians to fund their election campaign. We all know it's going to happen. Does it make it better and more transparent if instead of it happening through the back door or through the front, whichever the gates are that are being used, if actually it is declared that I am a lobbyist, I represent the following interest, I am paying you this much check for your re-election fund? I'm not sure if it's necessarily better, but at least it's more transparent. You know whom he's representing. Is it better or worse?
First of all, I mean, if you look at the US situation, it is far from transparent. To start with, the act that regulates lobbying there are about 80% of the lobby firms are not even registered under that act. They have not accepted that act at all. So they are not being regulated. That's
there are
one.
large number which are. There's something like 1,200 in 2011 alone. There was something like 12,000 registered lobbyists. In the US.
But the actual number is far larger.
Far
it's
larger,
about four times more than that.
Wow.
And they're not
actually, it's not
registered.
just in the US. In Brussels, they're about 15,000.
Exactly.
Brussels, the one city of Brussels, there are 15,000.
That's because the EU is there.
15,000 registered
That's
lobbyists.
because the EU.
So that in itself brings out the power of money and inequality. I think the one fundamental distinction we have to make from USA and between USA and India is that our constitution has a word that theirs doesn't, which is socialist. And that was as an amendment in 1976 that was added, which means as a nation we are committed to social and economic equality. Which means you can't have one corporation which has loads of money, give it to someone and say, okay, we are deep drilling in these areas, we are causing contamination of the lands, but just make these problems, let not the government regulation agency look this way, just form some other way.
I think that's the nub of what all three of you are saying. It's in a sense unfair to the poor, because the poor will not be able to take advantage of it, and so you will end up in a situation where the corporates are bound to have the advantage because they've got the deep pockets to actually pay for it. That I think substantially sums up what you're saying.
Unfair to the poor, unfair to the fundamentals of Indian democracy, and unfair to the aspirations of our founding fathers and mothers. So we are talking of social justice, we are talking of a different kind of democracy. This is not a democracy where we are not going to be respecting substantive equality.
Respond to this charge. It will be unfair to the poor.
Lobbying is part of public affairs as a practice. It involves the media, it involves chambers, it involves industry association, it involves other interest groups, charitable organizations. It involves a variety of people. It involves also individuals who are sitting out here. I think we need to look at all the stakeholders who are playing in the space of public policy making. How much of the media, for example, in the last 20 years has actually covered the farm sector?
Actually, a lot.
No, very little.
Can I just say, actually, the media of all the people whom you mentioned, let me leap to the media's defense, which I don't always do on the show. But the media does actually go to the poorest of the poor, pass and see what is happening on the ground. The others may or may not.
If you have to compare it, I've not even completed my point. If you have to compare it to other kind of reportage that takes place in the media, you will find that a large part of the section of society, the large number of people are being excluded. And when we want to look at transparency, and we want to look at lobbying actually happening or public policy decision making happening, there has to be a transparency at every possible level of all the players involved, so that they get that kind of voice in out there. You can't deny the democratic right either of a farmer or of an individual like me or anyone out here to go and express myself and say that I'm interested in something.
I think that's fair enough.
You get an informed decision then.
What Devinder seems to be making is that at the end of the day, if you have the poorest of the poor, if you're a farmer who's going to be affected adversely by a certain policy, you're not going to be able to hire a lobbyist, you're not going to be able to hire Dilip, you're certainly not going to be able to hire Ryan. So what do? You may be able to get the media crew to come in and film you.
Your fundamental question.
Now that I've got everyone really angry. Ryan first, then you, Devinder.
Are we, by continuing in the fashion in which we are, going to actually prevent lobbying from happening? It's something like betting. You ban it, it's still going on.
Okay,
so
that's a different point.
No,
that's a different point. It's a valid point, but it's a different point. I'll come to that point.
So therefore the point is that by saying that lobbying should be banned, all you're going to do is ensure that what is already an opaque activity becomes more clandestine.
No. Ryan, that's a valid point. I
want to come back to that. Now look at it the other way around. If you were to have a regulation in place, what would the regulation do? The regulation would obligate the corporate first to set out who his lobbyists are. Two, there could be certain restrictions on how much every corporation can spend as a percentage of its revenue on lobbying. So you can't have somebody who's doing a business of 100 crores spending 20 crores on lobbying. The lobbyist would also be required to set out who are the bureaucrats he met, what did he meet them for. Those bureaucrats in turn would be required to keep a log. There would be a system of checks and balances. Ultimately, you would be able to ensure that though corporate India does get its voice is a legitimate voice which does not handle things by just manipulating behind the scenes. Now, you would still have a situation where some people do that, but then of course, India has large sections of poverty, there's no doubt about it. But why would you allow a corporate and straight away tell him, you can function in the marketplace, you can go and sell your car at whatever you want, but you have no right to look at government to ensure how it regulates your activities? Who's going to come and invest if the corporate is not even allowed to legitimately? So then what are you going to say? Essentially you're going to say, ban FICCI, ban CII, ban all of them, because they're also in a sense only lobbying. So are you going to walk down that path and have a situation where you say corporate India's voice is muffled?
See, I don't have any problem even if the voice is muffled. But I must make it very clear that when
what did you just say? You don't have
I won't have any problem if the voice is muffled. This year the government of India under revenue foregone category has given a tax exemption of 5,73,000 crore to the corporates. 5,73,000 crores. Till 2004, 2005, these figures have been flashed down.
No,
32 lakh crores.
This particular point is being debated at growth length. It's not the same. I mean, in a sense, the review foregone is not actually a sop given to
it's like saying when you mentioned the Kansas University study, it also is the same. It says, so much invested and so much was the benefit. So I'm talking about the benefit here. So having said that, the point I'm making is, if 5 lakh crores was to spend on poverty eradication or on hunger eradication in India, I can assure you there would have been nobody hungry for this year, at least in India. Now, is that what you want, or you want the corporates to be taken care of and then you believe that trickle down will take place? It doesn't take place.
I'm asking, why are you saying that it's okay to muzzle somebody's voice in India? That's the point he's making. I'm not disagreeing. Look, let's set policy. Let's set what the policy should be aside for a minute. Does everybody have a right to be heard is the point that Ryan is making.
It can't happen. It can't happen. How do you just, how does a poor farmer come and raise his voice? Unless you are with bags of money, your voice is not heard. It's like Supreme Court. A poor man cannot go and file a case in Supreme Court. He has to be rich to go and file a case in Supreme Court.
The way the farmer gets his voice heard is actually on the basis of the numbers he talked about. If there are 40% of them who are poor, then jolly well, if they back this guy, he's going to be in parliament. It doesn't matter if he's got 400 crores backing him of corporate money. That's one.
They get their voice heard through the ballot box.
And they do. And that's how democracy should function.
And I agree with that. But you're not, I would say that it's not about muzzling anybody's voice. Although I have sympathies with what Devinder is saying. In a democracy, in a democracy, we certainly have every section should have a voice. However, is it a even playing field? That's a big question. You're not coming to that, and it's
we spent actually the last 10 minutes discussing exactly that
so,
point. There is
no,
an
but
unfair playing
it's
field.
so uneven, because the way you're saying, I would say that there has been some pretense, at least, of trying to make it an even playing field, but by legalizing lobbying, you're going to say that we'll do away with that pretense and we'll actually institutionalize the hierarchies that we're looking at.
Ryan's point is that lobbying is already
I'm
legal.
not
You
saying
just
it's
have to
going
ban
to be
it
an
now.
even playing
Yeah.
field. As long as they are rich and poor people simultaneously, the playing field can't be even.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. The only way to make it an even playing field
So
is take the money from the rich and give it to the poor.
So, and Dilip's point is that where the playing field becomes leveled is at the ballot box, because then a large number of poor actually have a vote. Do you agree with him on that?
I do
Well,
not.
just give me a
Farmers
sec.
are,
Let me get-
farmers
let me
are
get-
the only people who are not taxed.
Okay.
Who says they don't
Because
have a
their
lobby?
numbers are awesome.
Who says they don't have a lobby? They are the only people. Agricultural income is the only thing in India which is not taxed. Who says they don't have a lobby?
So the lobby for the farmers and for the poor are actually
That's
the
where the
people
lobbies
whom
work.
they are electing.
Vikram, that's where the lobbies work.
Yes.
They create that impression which is wrong, fundamentally wrong.
What, that farmers do
if
pay tax?
Yes, National Sample Survey Organization report says, it is in the parliament, it says that Indian farmer on an average, monthly income of an average Indian farmer is rupees 2,115 per month per family. Do you think they should pay taxes? A. Then 2,90,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 50
but
years.
a lot of
That's the
rich
average.
farmers- No, but a lot
That's
of
the
one
average.
minute,
I
one
want to
minute.
know.
Well,
why
that's
not?
the average. They are rich farmers. They are rich farmers.
You
They
tax
get a lot of
them. Who
money.
stops them? No, you tax them. Nobody is asking that you
No,
should
but that's
stop
not
them.
the
Actually, I'm not anybody who tax them whether I wanted to or not. I
yeah,
haven't yet
question
made
is-
the finance
no,
minister.
no,
of the
no,
country.
Clear about one thing. Anybody who's below a certain
Anyway,
income level will
income
not be
level,
taxed.
even if he's an
Anybody who's
industrial
above
worker.
it will be taxed in every part of the world. Now the simple point is, here we are talking about very rich farmers who have incomes running. You can see how rich some of the farmers are, and good luck to them. You can see how rich they are. I mean, they say Ludhiana has more Mercedes-Benzes than Delhi.
They're not farmers. They're
All
industrial.
right, okay, they're industrial.
You should go.
The substantive point that Dilip made was that at the end of the day, even if you allow corporate lobbying and other things to really come into its own and become overground and become totally transparent, the farmers and the poor people will not lose their voice, because the ballot box is the equalizing factor. Do you agree with that?
The fact it is not. Because if you just see how the way the parliament and the members of the parliament behave, I'm citing one instance, and they're countless. One instance in which 27 MPs got together and they say that in the midday meals we should promote this biscuit, certain biscuit. They got paid by the agencies, by the lobbyists, by the illegitimate.
But perhaps you should say allegedly paid. There are suspicions they got paid, or do we know for a fact that they were paid?
I know for a fact that they were paid.
No, but
they were doing it because a lobby firm told them to do it.
So the ones who were actually doing this were perhaps allegedly the corporates who are benefiting. It's got nothing to do with the intermediary.
Yeah.
If there is so much money to be made, as Sharif said, unless there's transparency as to why you decided to bestow biscuits on these children, then you're not going to be able to figure out who paid or who didn't pay.
Okay, so
if 27 people got together in the lobby of parliament and decided to lobby for this change,
So they were not representing their constituency. That's all I'm saying. So you're saying,
I agree with you. But what I'm saying is that unless you control that, the guy who pays him to make him go and take this decision along with 27 others, what's the point of controlling that bloke?
That's such a lame thing to say, honestly. No. When you say, okay, why don't you stop rape? Oh, you can't stop rape as long as people don't start thinking of women differently. So until that happens, we can't have this. The point is whether you allow. The point is today corporations are committing crimes routinely.
But
companies and individuals and lobby firms and individuals are facilitating those crimes through legitimate and illegitimate means. The point is, do we make it all legitimate and make it worse and then scratch out the word socialist from our constitution?
I fully endorse the concept of socialist in the constitution. I have no issue with that.
Explain
All I'm saying is that if you want corporations to get their voice heard, and corporations unfortunately or fortunately, as some may think, are a gross minority in this country, their voices just can't be heard. So whether
they
it
are
is
95% of the voice. They're everywhere.
I think this is where I think it's not to do with voice. It's got to do with perception of voice. Yes, certainly they look like they've got a huge voice.
Influence.
It's got to do with influence. I agree. I agree. No.
What he's saying is,
But I don't think it's 95% of the influence. Otherwise,
But I'm saying
half the
those-
laws we have on the book wouldn't be there if corporates had 90.
let's look at the last 5 years.
Yes, sure.
What are the pro-people policies that we have got?
Actually,
A right to
bill,
food.
the land
Yeah,
bill,
no,
both of
right
them are
to
coming
education,
under
sorry,
the
sorry.
pro-
All of
If you
those
could just
are-
repeat that. Which one? They all happened with UPA 1. Is the
Food bill
No,
to come.
all two.
yet to
UPA
come.
2.
Yet to come. So look at UPA 2. You've not got
Narega.
all the ones that, and that's also UPA 1. So that was a very different political arithmetic that was working.
But that
in this
lobbyists were not any less active at
no,
that
no,
time.
must have been. But
All I'm saying is that
honestly,
lobbyists were as
The
active
last 5
then.
years
but-
have to
but-
do with lobbying.
Yeah, nothing to do with lobbying.
No, all
It's got nothing to do with
We
lobbying.
were making a different point. We were talking of the influence of the corporate.
Yeah.
So look
If they
at.
had-
let
if they had
me
it,
just, let me
can
just
I-
finish the point.
So was it less in UPA 1?
I'm making a point that if you look at even in UPA 1, from special economic zones to the mining policies to the coastal zone policies, there are a huge number of policies which were completely dictated by the corporates.
Amitabh, can I
It's-
say something? Even in UPA, hang on, in UPA 2 actually, the corporates have actually, if you ask about their voice, they are saying that policy after policy has been followed that is actually very inimical to them, but there's no investment that is happening. You've had retrospective tax provisions that have been done. You know, if you ask corporates for their list of woes, they'll give you a list which is that long.
But again,
Right now, I think everyone is unhappy with UPA 2, and I can assure you that corporates are as unhappy from what they say.
It's a fundamental question. Let's look at the contradiction. You're talking of people, at least 25% who live without 3 square meals a day. Is that more important? Or are we talking
I think
about
we all agree it's
corporate-
more important.
Nobody's
I
agreeing.
think we all
But
agree.
can I-
Important.
How can we not approve the right to food?
But banning, no,
Yeah, we should approve.
banning
Nobody's
lobby is not
disputing
going to
it.
help
But
that.
it's not
just
happening.
one
That's
point.
right.
That's not happening for other reasons.
You know, because, I mean, if there's an impression that lobbyists are behind all of these things, because there's a perception that perhaps that certain lobbyists must have got X or Y done, it doesn't mean you should be denying people right to expression.
You're talking about people or corporations?
No, I'm talking about people at large, across.
Which
You know?
includes
And-
corporations.
Which includes corporations.
When you try to say that, you know, poor can utilize their vote, and then the rich have to come through their influence. I think these are two things which are not correct.
I didn't actually say
I'm
that.
not saying that. I'm not saying that.
The impression that we get from this discussion. I think let's be very clear, the corporates also have that ballot box to operate. They can also use that ballot box to bring about all those changes that they want to bring. It's not that they have a role, extra economic role that they play after the elections is done. I think that is very unfair.
Everyone around here would agree on the fact that, yes, you should have an equal playing field, that the poor should also be having a voice in India just as much as anybody else does. Anybody who disagrees with that on this panel? No. Good, I thought not. Number two, I think we all would be in agreement on the fact that any lobbyist or whatever, corporate influence, which crosses a certain line, which comes down to bribing somebody, bribing a minister, bribing a bureaucrat, is clearly wrong. Does anybody disagree with that also?
It's a jailable offence.
It's a jailable offence. Okay, so we've got a consensus on those two issues. Now let me come to, in addition to the level playing field argument, the point that Ryan was making a short while back, where he said, actually, if you were to bring all of this onto the records the way it is in America, where you can track who has paid for what and who has influenced which minister and who has paid what to whose electoral roles, it actually makes it a more transparent process than is actually happening right now. And I want to get everyone's reaction to that, starting with you. Does it make it more transparent? If you know that this minister is standing up or this MP is standing up in parliament and arguing for something, and you have a record which says X lobbyist paid him this much money for his re-election funds, does it help in some way?
No, I think both are wrong. I think it is unfair to say that because it is legitimized there or it is transparent in America, so we must also follow the pattern. I think a wrong is a wrong, whether it is transparent or whether it is done in a hidden manner. When the governments fail to govern, that's what they do. So anything जो हाथ में नहीं आता है, you legalize it. Prostitution नहीं होता है, legalize कर दो. Lobbying नहीं control में है, legalize कर दो. अगर आपका betting control में नहीं है, legalize कर दो. Tomorrow they might say murder नहीं होता है, murder होता है, उसको भी legalize कर दो. I mean, is there an end to it? All bad things in society are being legalized now. When you and me were a child, you'll remember we used to say those who stockpile, those who indulge in black marketing, those who indulge in all the hoarding are bad guys. Today, this commodity trading is what?
Having just equated lobbying with prostitution and a
No,
lot of
I'm
other
just
things,
giving
Sharif has
example.
something to say to
I'm
you.
just giving an example.
Sharif, you want to say something to him, I'm sure.
Well, I think there is a difference between prostitution and I don't think any one of us have actually really worked for any of them as yet. So, no, but I think the point is, I'm not sure whether the American system is a solution to the Indian scenario to start with. I think if you just look at how Europe has evolved, okay, which is similar in the sense that it's a very diverse region. It has, a large number of people who are perhaps, backward. There are a lot of number of people who are rich, but not rich that much because their economies have failed or things like that. If you look at the UK history, for example, it's only now after they reached a level of transparency when it comes to government, when it comes to various other institutions, when it comes to charitable institutions, NGOs, etc., that they've reached that they're now considering a register. It's only after that. What has worked in Europe and what has worked in UK has been self-regulation, okay, to start with, which starts with a certain element of actually having certain ethical practices out there.
Okay.
Okay, and I think India, I mean, PRCI itself has self-regulation out there, and that's why we haven't had instances across all the member agencies where there's any such allegation. That are out there. So I don't think the US system is a system that we need to really look at.
Let me throw that to you then, Amitabh. Ryan's point that if you were actually to have it on record somewhere, who is lobbying and who is doing what for whom, does that help in transparency? Would people be, because if you get it as an illegal gratification through a truck or a train in the middle of the night in your back door, it's very tough to track it. If it's actually out there on paper for everyone to see, does it help the system?
Yeah, theoretically,
is that substantially the point, Ryan, you were making?
Correct.
Okay.
I never said that somebody should go and legitimately pay money. I have never said that payment of money should be legitimized.
Okay.
What I have said is what lobbying is normally considered is advocacy. You go, you meet a group of bureaucrats, you give your point of view. Your point of view may be, okay, small cars should not have this excise duty levied on them. So you go in a group, you give your point of view, you meet people. Now certain companies may have a lobbyist. That lobbyist is then on their payroll. That lobbyist, every time he meets a bureaucrat or a minister, has to log on. He has to keep a statutory record. At any time somebody wants to investigate it, they can come, they can look at the books and say, oh, but your guy met this guy 5 times. Okay, so he did. Now, I have never said that payment should be regularized, because if you regularize payment, then it is official bribery. So what I'm really saying is, they should have, since you are going to have, and the kind of lobbying I'm talking about is a lobbying de-horse payment. So if you are going to have people who are going to go and lobby, then it's much better for everyone if you know what they do, if you know which corporates hire lobbyists, if you know which corporates don't. There still will be people. There still will be people.
No, but is it better than having to the back? So does that add to transparency? Is Ryan's
no, but
point?
Vikram, I was
just wanted to say.
Okay, sorry, I had given him the chance.
So no, I was just going to say that we are again not looking at the context. Theoretically, it might sound good, but given the web of secrecy we have, and given the way our policy,
but doesn't this go away from the web of secrecy?
It does not, because you will use it only to a limited extent, the point that you earlier made, and otherwise there would be such immense amount of secret deal making that will continue. No. So you just
maybe it doesn't fix everything. Ryan's point is, does it make things more transparent? That's the only point.
It is not going to make things better. This is not and the second thing I wanted to say is that we are also talking largely of legislations. In India, it also goes beyond legislation. It is, the governance deficit is so much about implementation, and that's where a lot of lobbying happens, and that's another problem. The third thing, just one brief point, is that fortunately at times the anti-defection bill works against parliamentary procedures in terms of what it wants to achieve. But at least in this case, I think it's worthwhile to look at that. Therefore, what happens is lobbying is not with individuals, it's at the party level. And therefore, it institutionalizes corruption much more when you're really looking at voting on big issues.
Okay. So, yeah, you wanted to quickly say something, then I want to take a break.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was, in the US itself, what we find is, where do you stop? I mean, if you say this must be made transparent, what we have there is a revolving door. There's a large number of senators, ex-congressmen who are now lobbyists in the US. There are bureaucrats, just like you have, say, in a company like Dua Associates, bureaucrats in senior positions now become lobbyists in lobby firms. So then this is giving you much more access, and that's not illegal. You can't say that a bureaucrat cannot work.
Most US investors in India have been lobbying actually.
Exactly.
They go back and become a company executive or on the board of the company.
Okay, so is there a you're saying there's a conflict of interest which that system sets up, and it's a systematic conflict of interest.
Exactly. So influence peddling happens in all.
I think it goes deeper. It's, as Sharif said, it's got to do with legitimate interests being public. It's got to do with bribery and corruption being separated, as we discussed earlier. But I think we need to recognize that just because you've got a rule book, it just means only one thing, that government has one more whipping boy to say, okay, we're going to set a new bunch of rules for you, as with everything else in this country. So I don't think that you're going to win any prizes or clean up corruption by putting a new rule book in place. It's just going to be business as usual.
Okay, with everyone nodding their heads for once in unison, I'm going to quickly take that opportunity to take a break and come back with the audience when we return. Welcome back to the big fight. Should lobbying be banned? Should it be completely legitimized? Should companies have to at least make disclosures about it? We just had the Corporate Affairs Minister Sachin Pilot in the Rajya Sabha just a few months back saying that companies in India don't actually have to make any disclosures at all under the Companies Act on this subject. Is that something which at least needs to change? Let me get the audience in right now. Gentleman there.
By legalizing it, by putting regulations to it, we are just putting a driver into the train who tells us the speed of the train, the destination it goes to. So that's better, right?
So I just said that it is a legitimate voice. That is correct. Everybody needs an expression. But when that expression is being used, to lobby before, and that is good. But when does it go to that thin line? How can we define that thin line in a country like India, where it's so diverse that we not even know that where the sources are and what all is happening? So where does that?
I think we have established that a truck of cash is crossing the line. That much we have established. Let me get final thoughts from all of our panelists. I'm going to go in this direction. Dilip, I'm going to start with you. 15 seconds. Final thoughts.
Ultimately, it's about the ballot box. It's about the political process, cleaning it up. If you clean it up, all kinds of other processes get cleaned up. At this point of time, we are trying to clean up one wheel of a large democracy which has probably 18 wheels. And I think it's not going to work. It's just going to result in lots of things getting below the table, below the radar, and you'll end up with the same bunch of results. So don't do legislation which is piecemeal, which attempts to control one silly wheel of a much larger locomotive.
Okay.
In the last 28 years in Bhopal, what we have seen is this corporation has committed the worst crime in history. 25,000 more people dead, 150,000 people still battling chronic illnesses, next generation with birth defects, and yet the company is still moving scot-free. And the company that has taken over this company, which is Dow Chemical, is actually doing business in this country, is actually selling a pesticide that it cannot in the US because it damages children's brains.
It's a slightly different debate.
And all of this, no, I'm saying all of this, and that the company continues to do business in this country while its subsidiary is absconding, is because of lobbyists who have worked, and we have got documents through the RTI that clearly show what the lobbyists have achieved through ministers like Chidambaram and ministers like Kamal Nath. So what I'm saying is, if Bhopal is not to be repeated and occur everywhere else, we have to ban lobbying.
Okay, fine. With the health warning again of people not being here to defend themselves. Right.
There are rights that everyone has. And I think whatever decision making, the process that we have has to be far more transparent. And as Dilip was really saying, you can't catch one group. You need to look at all of the groups, all of the players in public policy making, and look at what they're really doing, and whether we have that level of transparency so that you have some form of an equal playing field in this whole thing. So as I said, what you didn't really like was media, chambers, lobbying firms, legal firms, PR agencies, the government, most importantly the government. You need to bring some form of transparency there so that you can actually, walk down that corridor of power, as we call it, and not look dirty.
No, that all of them have to have transparency is not something which I was disputing. I was questioning whether the media goes and talks to the poorest of the poor. I'm seeing sometimes more than the others.
No, I was talking about, I was talking about all of them being a player, so that because
Obviously all of them are players. All right.
I want to illustrate it with an example, classical example. When you say that the poor have they can raise their voice through the ballot box and then the policies can be designed. I think if you remember in the UPA 2, Jairam Ramesh, when he was the Minister for Environment, there was a ban imposed on BT brinjal, which is a genetically modified crop. It was after a national consultation across the country where people resoundingly said no to genetically modified crops. Now look at the backway entry of in April they introduced a Biotechnology Regulatory Authority of India bill, which actually bypasses all those objections that the civil society raised or the nation raised, and now it will get passed through in monsoon session. So what do you do? Please tell us, what can individual poor do to stop those kinds of lobbying efforts to becoming a law? Okay, I think that's the question which is very important in this debate.
These questions are important. The fight between the rich and the poor or the disparities will remain at the moment. What I am saying is something different. We began this topic on a simple point. Should lobbying be banned? In my view, it's unlikely to be banned. It's here to stay. And in my view, it's much better off regulated.
Regulate it, don't ban it.
There is a need to ban corporate lobbying. I think we need to look at the nature of Indian democracy. If you're talking of a corporate nature of Indian democracy, then you cannot continue with the kind of lobbying we're looking at. So there is a huge need to really control it, ban it, and the line between corruption, I think we've very comfortably said, and you were saying that truckload of money is the thin line. I would say it's not really about that. The line has to be much before that.
I said we know for a fact that when it's a truckload of money, it's
sure,
the line. I'm not saying that is the line.
But the point
line has to be drawn somewhere. The truckload is way past.
But the point I'm making is that policies have tremendous implications on people. And if you're just talking of corruption, then that's looking at a unidimensional picture. But if you're looking at the entirety of the policy and how that policy is going to impact, for instance, SEZ, what's going to be the impact on the poor, and therefore you need to ban lobbying.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. I think at any rate, the more transparency you have, the more debate you have around all of these issues, that's also a step towards transparency. So we promise to be back again next week with another such debate on The Big Fight. You who have been watching The Big Fight, we'll be back next week.